days from death. All hope was lost. The things you have to do to survive. They just wanted to get back home. But they had been stuck on a mountain for months. One minute you're with your friends, celebrating because you just won a big game. And the next, this is the true story of the Andes Mountain. On October 11th, 1972, a 22-year-old man by the name of Nando was playing for a rugby team in Montevideo. That's the capital city of Uruguay. And right now, him and his team are super hyped because they just won a big game. And this will qualify them for the tournament that will be held in Santiago, Chile, which was only a few-hour flight. And to celebrate the big win, Nando and his team went out to eat. They got asado and empanadas. Now for those who don't know, asado, or barbecue, is a staple in Uruguayan culture, often enjoyed in social gatherings with friends and family. And empanadas are just small pastries filled with meat, cheese, or vegetables. And it's a very popular snack in Montevideo. Now the plane would have 2 open seats, so Nando thought it'd be a great idea to invite his mom and sister so that they could see him play in the tournament. So Nando asked his teammates if it'd be okay, because maybe they wanted to take somebody, but everybody said it was fine. So when Nando went home, he asked his mom and sister if they wanted to go, and of course they said yes. So the trio began packing. They were very excited, because not only was Nando going to play in a big tournament, but they'd be able to share this moment as a family. So the next morning comes. Nando wakes up, eats breakfast, and heads off to go practice with his team. But they would only do a light scrimmage, because muscle soreness and having to sit still for a prolonged period don't really mix well. After practice, he heads back home, eats lunch, and goes to bed early. But he really didn't even sleep much, if at all. Most of that time he was just laying in bed, trying to sleep, but he just couldn't. He was too excited, just anxious for his big moment. When the sun finally rose, the trio all had their bags packed and were ready to go on their team flight to Chile. Now they'd be traveling on a chartered flight, so it was supposed to be really comfortable. He'd be with his team, they'd have all this extra space because there was only 45 passengers, and the pilot had flew this route many times before. But for some reason, as soon as he stepped foot on that plane, Nando felt this sense of fear. Like there was this little person inside his inner self, trying to tell him to just turn around. And as this was happening in real time, Nando was just standing there, with a blank look on his face. But nobody noticed. Eventually, his sister Susie would bump into him on accident. She was struggling with her suitcase trying to get it up the steps. She had bumped into Nando when she finally got to the top. That would be an odd place to just stop moving. She looked at him and just said, and Nando snapped out of it. When he finished helping Susie with her suitcase, Nando went to his seat, still trying to get over that weird feeling he had earlier, when he suddenly gets nudged by his teammates, who was just excited for the tournament. And a few more of his teammates ended up joining in on the fun. And naturally it was just infectious, so Nando also joined in. And that turned into this moment of just pure bliss. And the man on board thought it'd be the perfect moment to take a picture. But little did he know that tragedy would strike just moments later. In the midst of celebrating and having fun, Nando just so happened to look outside to see the pretty blue sky. But he was kind of frustrated because the clouds were too thick and was blocking everything. The mountains, the blue sky, the sun, everything. He almost felt blinded in the sense of not being able to see past a certain point. And then he comes to this terrifying conclusion. Because if I can't see anything, then... And then he suddenly feels the plane violently jerk upward. And Nando just instinctively held on tight to his seat. And people are yelling and crying. Some had flew out of their seat. And to make matters worse, he hears a loud crash and saw something he didn't even think was real. The entire back of the plane had got completely destroyed. It's just gone, and all Nando could do was just hold on tight and wait for this to be all over. But in the midst of all this chaos, he remembered that his mom and sister are on the plane with him. So he looks around trying to find them, but then he hears another loud crash, this time on his right side, and he's still holding on tight and looking for his mom and sister, but then another crash, this time on his left side, and everything went black. After leaving Mendoza, the pilot started heading south across the Andes Mountains. When he believed he crossed the highest point, he turned north and began to descend. But he was still in Argentina, on the wrong side of the Andes, so the clouds that Nando would have saw would have been blinding to everybody, including the pilot. Now, because the pilot had thought he passed the highest point already, he started flying lower. He had flew this route 29 times before, so he was kind of just going off muscle memory. But this would prove to be a fatal mistake, because what was waiting for him was actually the highest point, and he was headed straight for it. But moments before disaster, he had noticed something. He had noticed that the clouds had black rocks inside of them, and he realized that that's not the sky ahead of him. That's a mountain. So he immediately jerked the plane upward, but it was already too late. The mountain had ripped straight through the plane's tail and one of its wings, leaving it completely exposed. And so since the plane only had one side of its wings, it naturally flew off balance and right into another mountain, destroying its last and final wing, sending the plane in a free fall down to the icy snow below. Now, when the plane was initially hit, Nando's sister was sitting a few steps ahead of him, and when the plane jerked upward, that sent many things flying, including suitcases, and those can weigh up to 25 pounds. So when everything went black, that's because Nando was hit with a suitcase, leaving him in a coma with a broken skull. Nando, can you hear me? Wake up. What happened? The plane crashed. Huh? Where's my mom? Where's my sister? His friends would break the news to him that his mom didn't make it, and also that his sister was in critical condition. They had inadvertently saved his life. Because they thought he was dead, they placed his body with the other corpses near the entrance of the fuselage, his head laid in the snow, with freezing temperatures, stopping it from swelling up and keeping him alive. Since Nando was unconscious for the first 3 days, here's what happened. So the plane initially had 45 passengers, but the crash claimed the lives of 13 people. They would begin moving the bodies to a different section of the plane, called the fuselage, and they gathered any food and warm clothes they could find. And they wanted to make it easy for a rescue team to be able to find them, so they ended up taking empty suitcases and using them to make a cross on the ground. And at that altitude, it's the coldest at night, so they huddled up together and used each other's body heat to stay warm. On the second day, 5 more people succumbed to their injuries, leaving 27 survivors. Later in the day, they heard a jet and a small plane fly over them, so they thought they were saved. But what they didn't know was, because of the way the plane crashed, it would have been impossible for anybody to see them. With the lack of food, some people decided to eat the snow, which is very bad because their biggest threat is hypothermia, and eating snow takes away energy and heat from the body and accelerates the hypothermia process. Nando was staying with his sister, and she was in rough shape, but she was determined to fight till the bitter end. And as far as what the boys were doing, they were scavenging through the wreckage, looking for anything that would keep them alive. They ended up using seats, debris, and luggage to build a shield to protect them against the cold. And to make water, they discovered that every seat back had an aluminum sheet. So they angled it to hit the sun and funneled the snow to melt into a tin can that they found from the plane. But this wouldn't be enough. To survive the Andes, they'd have to break the unwritten rule amongst humans. A man by the name of Roberto and 4 other survivors would use snowshoes made of strapping and seat cushions to trek up a mountain to search for the plane's lost luggage and the battery to power the plane's radio. So they trekked up through this freezing cold weather, but found nothing. Nando's sister was fighting a losing battle, and on day 8, her body gave out.
You have to move forward. You cannot cry. You can't destroy yourself morally or emotionally. You have to fight to survive.
And like his sister, he was gonna fight till the bitter end. He ended up using a map he found to try to figure out where he was, and when he felt he had a good understanding, he began looking at this mountain, convinced that if he just trekked up it, they'd be saved. But the current issue is the lack of food, Actually, the food is completely gone, and talks about breaking the unwritten rule resurfacing amongst the group. They were starving, and had resorted to eating pieces of leather, pieces of shoes, even wood, but there was nothing, and what they needed to do to survive was blatantly obvious. Roberto just stood up and said, "We're starving. If we don't eat, we'll die. We need protein, and it's inside the bodies of our friends." Now, this idea was heavily scrutinized. Some survivors were simply just repulsed, and others resisted on moral grounds. But eventually, Roberto just grabbed a piece of broken glass, walked over to one of the bodies, and began cutting, breaking the unwritten rule. On day 11, the survivors found a radio and used some ingenuity to get it to work, but all they found was that the search was called off. With the search called off, it was confirmed in Nando's mind that he would have to climb up that mountain, but he knew he couldn't do it alone, and the idea of doing such a thing was kinda insane, because they'd have to leave the only shelter they have and wouldn't be able to return. So this would be a gamble, and he'd be betting with his life. An avalanche buried most of us and claimed 8 lives. It felt like 1,000 tons of concrete on my chest. I could barely breathe. Nando took this personal. He felt like the mountain was trying to kill them all, one by one. But he still needed a climbing partner before he could begin his escape. They needed to trek up a mountain to retrieve lost luggage from the plane's tail. And to prepare for this journey, they sewed together sleeping bags using copper thread. And to carry the supplies, they converted clothing into knapsacks. This would ultimately help prepare them for the final chapter. This was it. Almost 5,000 meters in elevation. Nando, Roberto, and one other survivor set off to climb up the mountain. And in reality, they had no idea where they were. They just had faith that they were going in the right direction. The climb was brutal, and the high altitude meant that the air was much thinner, so every breath that they took had much less oxygen than at sea level. This reduced blood flow to their heart and muscles, and this restricted blood flow can eventually cause brain fluids to leak inside the skull. This wasn't going to be a one-day thing. This was going to be a mission. They were just a few steps away, but when they got to the top, they realized the cruel reality. Everything that they thought was wrong. They weren't in the foothills. They were in a mountain chain. Now, they'd have to dig even deeper than ever before. Demoralized, broken, and exhausted, Nando and Roberto sent the fellow survivor back down into the fuselage so that they could have more food. They would have to go back down the mountain and into the cold valley. As Nando's trekking, he feels his body getting more and more weak. And eventually, he just starts saying to himself, one foot in front of the other. If we stop to think, we'd probably freeze to death. One foot in front of the other. How many people have we lost? I lost track. One foot in front of the other. Wait a second. Is that? What Nando saw that day would be insignificant to us, because it was just rocks. But to him, it signified civilization. Up to this point, he had been living in a black and white world because of the harsh snow. But no more. And then all of a sudden, he saw it. A mule rider is someone who rides for several hours, often covering anywhere from 20 to 30 miles with regular rest breaks. And mules aren't horses, they're an offspring of a donkey and a horse. So this mule rider had been traveling for about 15 miles already, so he was looking for a rest spot. He wanted something with a nice waterfall, and he knew just a spot. So he took his mule, and he started heading straight for it. But when he got there, before the man could even get off his mule and have a sip of water and have a bite to eat, he was interrupted by this yelling sound coming from the side of him. So he turns his head to see a man in some seriously rough shape, and another sitting not too far away. And they looked like they were just days away from death. So immediately the mule rider understood the situation and went off to find help. A day later now, a group of mule riders show up and take Nando and Roberto to a local village and get them some much needed food and water. And as they're eating, they would tell them about the other survivors that are back at the crash site. So on day 71, the Chilean Air Rescue Service dispatched helicopters to rescue the remaining survivors, but it would take them one day to be able to actually find them. For the remaining survivors that were back at the crash site, they were listening over the radio to see if Nando and Roberto had got saved, and once they found out that they did, they knew it was just a matter of time before they'd be found also. It was a day of celebration, and just as they did before the accident, they were smiling and laughing, and the man thought it'd be the perfect moment to take a picture. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I'll be trying to make more soon. But for now, I'm out.